I want to talk about good characters. I want to talk about what a good character is and some tips to make a good character in RPGs, D&D, things like that. Um, Now, obviously, a good character is not something that is set in stone. Anyone can have their own opinion on what makes a good character. Anyone could have a potentially valid opinion on what makes a good character. No one opinion is more valid than the other. But in my opinion, what makes a good character is a memorable character. And one of the easiest ways to make a memorable character is the character's name. Um, and obviously, there are a lot of different ways to have a memorable character besides the name. Um, you can have a character have, a memorable accent, a strange accent, some sort of strange personality quirk, some sort of strange physical attribute, some mysterious backstory. There are all sorts of ways, in addition to having a good name, that you can make a character memorable. But the name is just one of the most sort of basic, on the surface level um, things you can do to to make your character memorable. Because what's the first thing you notice about a character? The first thing you notice is the character's name. Um, and just to give a little bit of reasoning why a memorable character would be a good character, because when you're playing D&D, right? You get the other players and you get the DM, and they're all doing their own things, right? The DM is focused on running the whole game, and he's got all that stuff going for him. He's trying to figure out everything. He's trying to organize everything, and the other players, they're all focused on themselves. They're all focused. All the other players think that their character is the coolest thing since sliced bread, and so you've got to you've got to get them to not think about their character and think about your character. Get them to remember your character, because if they remember your character, they'll talk with your character, they'll interact with your character, which will get you more involved in the game, and you'll have more fun. Everyone else will have more fun, and so yeah, that's one of the reasons I think that's why I think memorable characters are good characters, and names are a good way to sort of break the ice. If you have a good name, then you're on the right track. And I've got some examples of what I would consider to be good names from sorts of different media. Um, One of the things that does a really good job at having characters with memorable names is Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire, if you prefer. Game of Thrones, easier to say, but George R. R. Martin does a good job at naming characters. Um, for example, uh, one of the names I picked out is there's this certain sort of grim, scarred, brooding character that you'll know in from Game of Thrones. And but when you first sort of read the book or watch the show or however you're introduced to it, you're not gonna know this character by the name Sandor Clegane, right? You're gonna know him as the Hound, and his brother Gregor Clegane. You're not gonna know by that name. You're gonna remember the Mountain. You see, they've got names, but they've got a little sort of extra name that's shorter and more memorable. And also, I have the Kingslayer. Jaime Lannister is called the Kingslayer because the Kingslayer, it's I think the Kingslayer is a cool name. Another sort of piece of media that does a good job at having memorable names is Dark Souls, or any other Miyazaki From Software game. They're all pretty much the same. Um, but Dark Souls, I think all the bosses have sort of memorable names. For example, in Dark Souls, there's this giant wolf, right? This giant wolf is huge. He's got a big sword in his mouth and he jumps around. That by itself is a memorable image, but his name is the Great Gray Wolf Sif, right? Now, if his name was just Sif, it wouldn't be as good, but it's the Great Gray Wolf Sif. Those little sort of titles add a whole layer of memorability to the name of the boss. Also from Dark Souls, there's another rather famous boss. There's two of them. There's a big fat guy with a hammer and a little guy with a lightning spear, and those are Ornstein and Smaug, right? Um, but they're not just called Ornstein and Smaug. They're called Dragonslayer Ornstein and Executioner Smaug. Now, if they were just Ornstein and Smaug, it wouldn't be that memorable. But just because you've added that little extra title under their names, it becomes something more, right? It's something because names Ornstein and Smaug, yeah, they're names. You could remember them, but they don't have any meaning. Like Dragon Slayer and Executioner, they have meaning. They sort of give um, some sort of extra addition to the name. Um, and then some examples. I'd include some examples from Lord of the Rings because Lord of the Rings is just like the sort of basic fantasy thing. It's what D&D is. A lot of D&D is inspired by Lord of the Rings, and there's a couple of names that I think are somewhat memorable from Lord of the Rings. One of them is Bilbo Baggins. I think is a very memorable name because of the alliteration, the two B's. And for this same reason, Gandalf the Grey is a memorable name because of the alliteration. Another memorable name from Lord of the Rings is Treebeard. It's not particular. There's no alliteration or anything, but it's just Treebeard. You'll remember Treebeard. Um, and then I've got some examples from some of the games that I've played in, that I've been a player in, and that I've DM'd. One of the examples is the sorcerer character that there's a video about already on the channel. One of my sister's characters, her name was Ethilwen Moonbeam, right? Now, if her name was just Ethilwen, it wouldn't be too, you'd be like, oh, that's just some elvish thing, whatever. But because in addition to it, it's Moonbeam, you're like, that's Moonbeam? That's strange. And you'll that'll stick in your head. And so you'll remember it. One of my characters, Millard the Minstrel. There's nothing particularly exceptional about that name except it's got an alliteration, like I was talking about with Lord of the Rings, which is a simple thing you can do. Just have a name and then have a title, and then that's a good start. And if you can make the title alliterate with the name, then that's even better. Um, Another from one of the later games that I DM'd, there was a player who had a character named Ducky, and it was a gnome. He had a bunch of other names because gnomes like names. He had a bunch of other names besides that, but he went by Ducky, which is a memorable name. Not many people would go by Ducky, so Ducky his name is. And also from the first game I played, there was a character called Squeeper. Now, what's a Squeeper? I've got no idea, but I remember the name. So if you can get people to remember your name, you're one step closer to getting them to remember your character. So once they remember your character, now that's just the beginning, right? You've got to have something else to sort of keep their interest, some sort of personality quirk or accent or character. You've got to build your own character up. But the name is sort of a good sort of hook to reel them in. You have a good name, you'll get their attention, and then you can do the rest. And I'll probably make other videos about ways you can keep their attention once you've got their attention, other ways to sort of, build your character and keep it going. But that's just one way to have a good name. That's a good starting point. Thanks for watching.